Hello, and welcome to our second episode of the Everyday Disciple podcast. I'm Seth Burris, and with me today is my second guest, Roger James. Roger, how's it going?
It's going well.
This is the second episode we've done of this. So far, it's just been Cody and you. So far, I'm just starting with everyone that I've lived with. Um, So before we get started, I want to go ahead and go into our sponsor segment and thank first Hydra Girl, which is respectfully delicious, dangerously drippy. It's time to grip it, rip it, and look good doing it. Golf just got good. Roger, you do a lot of golfing?
I go about twice a year.
Yeah. I've golfed with Roger before. It's dangerous. Second is Sasquatch Gun Oil, the only oil tough enough for your gear and smooth enough for your beard. Protect your tools, your weapons, and your legacy with the power of the Squatch. Also, pretty good wood turning, handcrafted, purpose built, and always pretty good. From pins to prayer bowls, every piece tells a story because craftsmanship still matters. Also powered by Sabbath Coffee Roasters, where every roast is a reminder to slow down, rest well, and sip with purpose. Faith, family, and a fresh cup of Sabbath. I have had that coffee. It's very good. And then, of course, our friends over at Faith Points TV, where faith meets everyday life. You can catch also our Foundational Fathers podcast airing weekly right there on Faith Points TV. So, before we get started, I kind of want to introduce you two people. So, Roger, you and I have known each other since 2015, right? I think
Approximately,
about
somewhere around there.
2015, and we lived together for 8 years, roughly, before you got married. So
Yes,
yeah,
roughly
something like 8
8 years.
years. So first year of marriage, how's that been?
It's the best year of marriage I've ever had.
Okay, all right, that's good.
Uh,
We will have your wife on next week, so we'll see if she says the same thing or not. But last week when we were with Cody, was kind of a serious topic. We went really deep into mental health and some of the challenges that come with that. I think this week can be a little bit more relaxed. So focus this week is about health and fitness, and I think maybe the first thing people ask is why should they listen to you about that. So you want to tell people a little bit about your personal training business and kind of what you do?
sure. I work full time at a window factory.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Good start.
but I also, on the side, I do run a personal training or habit coaching business, depending on how you would note it. I don't really like put personal trainer or whatever. I went to school for exercise science at University of Illinois. That's where I got my bachelor's. And I've been training since I was in school, on and off. Some of that I did full time, but most of the time I do it on the side. And we can get into some of the reasons why I don't try to do it full time. Um, but yeah, I was right out of college. I also went and worked as a chiropractic assistant, so a lot on the rehab side. Um, a lot of different types of training that I've done is with strongman athletes. A lot of individual people just looking to get healthier, and that's like the vast majority of people. So part of why I don't do it full time is just the base that you're trying to reach. Um,
Mhm.
if I was going to go into like strength and performance, is a whole lot of traveling, going from team to team, and it's kind of just a really, I guess, system that I really didn't see as being a fulfilling life for me versus being able to really, pour into people in other ways.
It's really hard also, I feel like, to do that unless you like own a large gym or something, to
Mm-hmm.
do that from one place
Yeah.
and be settled. Yeah, so I know you've had some really good success stories. My mom is a great example of that. I know
Mm-hmm.
I think, lost probably 75 pounds over 2 years and got off of all but like two of the diabetic medications that she was on. I know, like, you've had some really successful performance athletes
Yeah.
that you've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And I like personal experience. I know a lot of people are looking and be like, well, you lived with him for 8 years. Why are you so out of shape? Um, all of the success I had came whenever I listened And then whenever I stopped listening was whenever I felt like I probably ended up the way that I am now. But one of the things that I think I learn a lot from has always been from seeing the kind of example you do with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is kind of a fun thing to be able to talk about. Is we out living together for 8 years. There's a lot of very interesting things that I saw you practice at different times, and probably the most interesting ones to me were some of the like dietary experiments that you would do with yourself. There's at least three that I remember most distinctively. One was you and Cody did a dozen eggs a day diet,
Mm-hmm.
which was um, effective, if a little bit unpleasant to live with. um, uh, and then the first year that we lived together, you did the bacon diet for a
Mm-hmm.
month, and then also the fasting thing that you did
Yeah.
during Lent, which was uh, maybe the most effective thing that you did. I feel like,
I actually lost more weight eating bacon every day than I did fasting 6 days a week.
yeah, that was probably my that was probably the craziest. What you ate? I think we figured out 75 pounds of bacon was the only thing you ate over 30 days.
Yeah, it was something
It's
like that. Yeah. I will caveat and say I specifically got center cut bacon because there was a deal on it.
uh-huh.
Um, but it also worked out really good, like macro percentage wise and
Yeah.
stuff as far as protein percent and that.
I just remember one of the most annoying conversations I ever had was coming home one day
Mm-hmm.
after you were like 10 days into it and you said, I need to double how much bacon I'm eating. I'm losing weight too fast. and it, but yeah, I remember specifically with the bacon thing. I remember you saying part of the reason that you were doing it is because you were like frustrated by people making just like blanket statements about like with dietary stuff about, oh, this is just inherently unhealthy, and that a lot of times it's like way more comprehensive than that, like people making the claim. I remember with that one specifically, you were like, well, people say, like people try to say that bacon's unhealthy. It's like, well, if you eat bacon with, you know, waffles and pancakes every day as opposed to eggs, it's very different.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things in health and fitness, some people will make certain things either out to be much bigger deals than they are, and then some things they will minimize as not being really that big of a deal. And I remember there was one study that came out and said like how bad eggs were, and then like there was a trainer that called that like was able to get into the research, you know, asked the actually got like a list of some of the people that were like involved in it because it was like a public study, and like called and asked them like what questions were asked and how they were asked, and it was like very, you know, I guess leading into a certain way. Like like they didn't ask them about, hey, did you have this for breakfast? Did you have this for breakfast? They only asked about like one thing, and then like when they dug deeper, they found that like, oh, the conclusion we reached wasn't really that comprehensive or that well. It's just we really didn't do a good job, you know, looking at specific data. We just kind of already had what we wanted to look for, and then went and looked for it.
Yeah, you find people, it's like, how many of these people have heart disease that are eating eggs? And then you go, oh, well, 40% of them have that. Well, it also turns out that the 40% that have it are
Yeah,
eating 2,000 more calories a day than
yeah,
the people who weren't. Yeah, I think that's one of the things, like for me, as somebody who doesn't have the training for it, that's very frustrating is when you try to look into, especially from a like dietary standpoint, try to look into a lot of the stuff you're eating. All of the studies are mainly sponsored by companies that sell food. And so they almost always are funding a study because they want a conclusion to be reached in a lot of time, in a lot of cases. Or they're like, is like, a company that sells, we only sell lean ground beef. And so we want to fund a study about why like not eating beef is bad for you. Or like the reverse of it, of like, we sell vegan products, we want to fund a study about why eating red meat's bad for you.
mm-hmm.
And so when the money is coming in that way, there's now a motivation for the people who are researching it. So from a like basic standpoint, when you are talking to somebody about diet, what are the kind, or like their health and fitness, what are the things that you're actually prioritizing? Because I think there's also a culture, especially in the US, of like, I need to be, especially for guys, it's like I need to look like a movie star. And one, that's not realistic, but
Mm.
also like it's also incredibly impractical and it's very expensive. So what are, when you're trying to have a practical conversation with somebody, what are the first sort of things that you talk to them about?
The first things I talk about to them about are motivation,
Mhm.
and then where they're at now. I know that sounds very general, but if I was to like ask most people questions about like, well, what should they be doing more for their health, or like what things do they think they should be doing, like you don't have to be a research expert to know everything to be better than you're at right now. I would say for the vast majority of people, they're either just like not motivated enough to like get started in the right direction, or sometimes maybe they're overwhelmed by information out there. But for most people, my goals and the way that I coach, at least as far as like the habit coaching side of things, not like performance coaching is completely different, because those people are usually already motivated, and it's really just like you know getting them a little bit more specific on where they need to tighten up on stuff. But for habit coaching in general, fitness and wellness getting better, it's what motivates you and what steps are we going to take, not just to improve where you're at, but to make it a long-term thing.
Mhm.
Because anybody can be like, hey, let's go on a really strict diet, really work out, and you're going to get results. But the question is, 10 years down the road, are you going to be back where you're at, or are you going to be continuing to live a healthy lifestyle?
Yeah, motivation I think is the biggest thing. It's when we wanted to bring you on, I think the thing that was coming to mind for me is the question about like, why do I need to prioritize this? Because I think especially for, I mean, I think the majority of a lot of the people that have watched this podcast are kind of younger guys, and I think there's a tendency, one, like for 25 to like 35-ish-year-old guys, if you have a physically active job, you're like, I'm in decent shape now. Like that's, it's not that, like, especially your testosterone's very high, it's not super hard to be in kind of general shape. And also, especially if you have a family started, your you tend to be very low on your priorities list.
True, true.
And so there's this thing of like, I like, why do I need to take X amount of time out of my day? Why do I need to actually care about this? And so like, I guess the question I would have for you is like, what are the things that you think in general people tend to miss when they're younger that create problems later? Like, as far as whether it's like health imbalances, bad dietary like habits, or just like things where you're like, you do this for 10 years, you're not going to like what you see.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing to take for granted is the time itself. Because when you're young, stuff always seems like so far away. And then 10 years later, it passed so quickly that you really didn't know what to happen. And know what happened. And like, if you were to go and ask like most older people, like if they could, there was something they could change or tell their younger self, it's almost always, you know, something that could be simple for them to start doing now. And when you look back at like kind of almost anything, whether it's finances, health, or like career, you're usually like, man, if I had done this 5 years earlier, or if you look back and now in hindsight, things are so much easier than they are now. But a lot of times, even the things in hindsight that you wish you were doing weren't rocket science. They were, oh, maybe I shouldn't have eaten pizza 6 days a week when I was in college.
I feel attacked.
Yeah.
But
So it's not necessarily complicated stuff. A lot of times it's just like choosing to make it a priority before it becomes a problem.
Mhm.
Um, Especially with health and fitness, like so much stuff is easier to maintain than it is to gain.
Mhm.
Um, so when you think of, even with like how much time and stuff you spend training, if you stay healthy, you have to spend less time staying healthy than you have to spend getting healthy.
Mhm.
So it's the earlier you start, the better you ingrain your habits younger, the better it's going to be long term.
Yeah, I think So that is one thing that I think was a misconception kind of that I had, was this idea of like, well, I'm like, if you're willing to say you're like a, I don't know, 27-year-old guy and you're single at the time, if you're willing to say, I'm going to take a year where I'm going to spend an hour and a half in an hour and a half of my free time in the gym to get into really good shape, it does not take that long every day to maintain that level of fitness.
Yeah, exactly.
And um the thing I think I've had, like, as somebody who's not married, doesn't have any kids, like that, from the friends that I've had who are in that stage of life, is one of the consistent things they've said is like, if it was not a priority before I got married and it was not a priority before I have kids, I definitely don't have the time now.
Yeah,
And that's that, like, it is easier to get into that, in to get to like adjust your life when that's already set aside, as opposed to I'm going to create a whole new pattern now.
correct. Well, and if you start seeing your physical fitness and health as an extension of your like responsibilities of the things you also want, I think it's a more healthy way to view it anyway.
Mm,
If you're going in like saying, well, you know, I want to be a godly husband or something like that, and I want to be a good father. Like, yes, everybody's abilities and stuff is going to be different based on, you know, what you're gifted, what your genetics and stuff are. So we're not telling everybody to be a pro athlete, but your kids are going to love being able to play basketball, you know, with them, you know, even if you're a late father and you're in your 50s, you know,
mm,
that type of stuff I think people take for granted, especially when you're older or a grandfather, you know, playing with your grandkids. You know, if you don't take care of yourself, you know, when you're young and middle aged, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of enjoy and pour into your kids and grandkids in the way that you would like to. And in the same way, like if you work a physical job, but you don't take your physical health seriously, your longevity in that career is going to be limited. And when you might hit your 50s and have to make a very difficult decision to change careers or something at a time when,
mm.
you know, financially might not make sense for you to do. So there's a lot of things that you don't know they're important until they become important.
Yeah, yeah, I think that is kind of, as far as like switching your mindset a little bit, I think that is an interesting way to view it. Of, it's my health is, even if I'm single right now, the investment I make in my health now is an investment in the, like, what body is going to be the, like, provider in
Mm-hmm.
in my family. It's going to be an investment for, like, what my wife receives in a spouse.
True.
And like, I know, like, thinking about my dad was older when I was born, of like being able, while I was in high school, to play basketball with my 60-year-old dad mattered to me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, my mom being in her 60s, able to like go run a race with her grandson, like, he's 18, he still remembers that. Like, and that sort of, like, there would have been a point where that wasn't an option if they hadn't
Mm-hmm.
taken their health seriously at different points. So going into some of the practical things, I think the biggest challenge for a lot of guys, right, is like, okay, I don't have a lot of time. I know, like, when we both worked at Pella, like, that could be a 12-hour day. Like, and yes,
Yeah.
like, the job is physical, but it's not the same thing as being intentional about it. What are, like, you have access to a very large gym setting, but didn't always have that option.
Mm-hmm.
What are daily habits and daily practices that kind of, in general, are good for health, that you see, where you're just like, this is a thing that doesn't require a crazy amount of time or investment?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and this is true in a lot of areas, is actually just being mindful of that. Because a lot of times, if you think about it, like how many times, you know, you don't have to necessarily know what exactly every calorie is in every food, but most people can tell you the things that, you know, they've been eating or something that they shouldn't have done, or they can tell you, you know, that, you know, they could have went for a walk but didn't. So a lot of times it's just actually being honest with yourself as to how much time do you actually have, because you can usually fit in more than you think you can. As far as like what specific things I think people should prioritize doing, I would say strength training is probably more important from a time standpoint than doing cardio. Not that cardio is not important, because obviously your cardiovascular health is important, but you will gain a bigger cardiovascular benefit from the recovery from strength training than you will gain a strength benefit from cardio training.
Hmm.
Um,
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah. So like,
and time wise, big movements, you know, having being able to bicep curl 90 pounds or 200 pounds is going to be a whole lot less relevant than you being able to squat your body weight and get it in and out of chairs when you're 80 years old.
mm, yeah. So that's like, I guess that's the thing. That's one thing I see with, especially with guys where it's like, I'm just going to start going to the gym with, and
Mm-hmm.
they have no plan is, uh, aesthetics versus practicality. Um, like I know, like when you see, because I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is like injury prevention,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially if you have a manual labor job. Um, is I think the things that are hardest to work on for me, the hardest one's been like my back
Mm-hmm.
of going, okay, how do I is I mean, again, I have access to a gym, so it's a little different, but like going, what are things that I can do to like help in general with my back, like with back, hips, knees. Those are probably the three biggest ones and then maybe shoulders are probably the
Mm-hmm.
biggest ones that I see. Like what are the if a guy doesn't have access to a gym and he's like, hey, I need to be what are like what would be the things that you'd be like, like these are some basic things that you could do for.
Like lunges, squats, hip thrusts. Those are all things you can do with zero equipment.
Mhm,
Obviously, you can add equipment if you want to do more of a strength focus.
mhm,
But you can also obviously make those things harder without equipment. Anything you can do two legs. A lot of times you can do a variation with one leg, even if you need balance support somewhere. As far as I feel like the hardest thing for people to do without equipment is back.
mhm,
Um, because one, either you're not strong enough to just find something to pull up if you're not already strong enough to do pull-ups, and it's not like you can use your body weight as much for resistance.
mhm,
But you can use a door frame to do like some sort of row or something. And when you're talking about like the common issues people have, back and knees, well, yeah, I can do some sort of back back extensions, even just like toe touches, squat to stands, where it's a mix of you know back and leg work. But I can't go and row unless I have at least a set of bands or something. But you can use like a door frame or something to do rows. But when you look at like when I say big movements, like having some sort of a balance and where you're built or skilled at. Like if you have a physical job, there may be some things you may never have to really worry about touching in the gym,
mhm,
because if you're doing that repetitive movement all the time at work, you're going to build ability to do that. But at the same time, you might do a lot of repetitive stuff and then have to do corrective stuff because you're getting a whole lot of imbalance or repetitive type injuries.
mhm.
A good example is if somebody's always at a desk, they're always sitting and looking down, they're gonna get tight this way.
Yeah,
And usually what that means you got to strengthen
yeah,
your back work, strengthen your shoulders, the rear. That's usually like as far as upper body where people's weaknesses are. Most people aren't weak up front. Most people are weak in their back. As far as lower body, most people are weaker in their hamstrings than they are in their quads, and they're usually weaker at doing you know glute work than they are at doing quad work. So some of that's just like everyday life. What do you build naturally just going through your normal everyday life, and you can kind of adjust your workout around that. But for most people, the things you want to be able to do are squat, hinge, lunge, push, and pull in some sense as far as the big movement categories. Um, most exercises can be put into one of those
mhm,
in some way, but if you're doing big movements on those, you're usually going to be pretty good. And it's generally the one of those that you don't want to do that you should be doing. Um,
yeah,
if you think about it, people tend to like to do things they're good at, and they tend to not like to do things they're bad at. So if you were just to say, "Hey, I don't know where to start working out," do a simple like, let's do 3 sets of 8 of lunges, squats, some sort of hinge. Maybe it's a deadlift, or just like a dumbbell deadlift, or some sort of Jefferson curl, um, overhead press, and find something to pull, to
mhm.
do a pull like that way. Whichever one of those you feel like you don't like the most is probably the one you need to be doing the most. Um,
think it's interesting that you don't like. You didn't mention curls. You didn't mention bench press. Uh, and like it's that like there are a lot of things that are I think naturally associated with like, well, I'm going to go to the gym and work on this. It's like, well, yeah, there's a reason that people like to do those.
Yeah. One and a caveat on that is that biceps are worked in your pull works, and the only reason I leave out bench press, even though like I love to do bench press because I love like powerlifting as a sport, overhead press is better for like shoulder mobility and health and stuff like that too. Like most people, like I said, are already usually anterior dominant from just natural life. Most jobs are going to leave you more that way. Sitting is going to leave you more that way. So doing bench press, even though like, hey, might make the number go up and might impress your friends, is not as transferable to your everyday life and movement and even shoulder health than being able to, move freely overhead in the same way.
If you were picking one from the gym, would you say squat is probably the best? Like as far as if you were like, I can do one lift a week.
Do one lift a week.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably be squat.
Yeah.
I mean, you can Frankenstein some together.
Yeah.
Do like a thruster, which is like a full squat to an overhead press or something like that. Okay. But I think for most people, squats would be better. Legs tend to be something that people lag behind at. Full squats are a lot better for the hips and stuff than, only the partial squatting that people get from maybe getting in and out of a chair every once in a while, and getting that full range of motion in like knees, ankles, hips, and back that you can get from doing like a full squat. I would say Olympic style specifically because there are a ton of different variations of squat, but Olympic style squatting is probably better for general fitness purposes. Just because it forces you to have that full mobility and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily have to start there.
And for like, because I know it's easy to hear stuff and be like, well, I don't know how to do that. I think one of the like easiest light bulb moments for me was like there'd be a couple times whenever I was first starting to get into stuff where I would be like, hey, how do I do this? And he would just send me a YouTube video. You can find online examples of how to do every exercise correctly online, like on you, like whether it's YouTube or just there's a video of it out there somewhere. And everyone there, everyone has slight variations, but the basic, the like basics are pretty easy to find for a lot of that stuff. What do you, if you have somebody who comes in, they have, or like say somebody watches this and they're like, all right, I'm going to start going to the gym. What are things that you recommend, like maybe either avoiding or being careful about because people can injure themselves? Because I know gotten in, like I know I've known a lot of people who are like, I'm going to start going to the gym. And then they're like, I'm going to start doing a bunch of deadlifts. And then they injure themselves because you can injure yourself doing deadlift. Or you don't know what you're doing. Right.
The biggest thing would be start with volume, no matter kind of what you're doing. Just because if you can do something for 15, you're probably not going to injure yourself in any major way other than like muscle strain. But if you're trying to max out on anything right away, you're more likely to hurt yourself, especially because you're going to kind of sacrifice doing things, maybe the right way to try to do it whatever you can to move it the biggest way. But I do favor sumo deadlifts over conventional deadlifts from a mobility standpoint.
Just the wider legs spread.
Yeah. One, it takes more hip mobility. Two, your back straighter, so there's less chance of back issues. But there is still benefit to actually like straining things and doing things in a way that, doing things that could be dangerous if not controlled and in an environment to that effect. The problem is when like you don't understand your own kind of breaking points in bodies. So that's why it's better to not focus right away on the heavy lifting until you have a sense of how your body's responding and stuff.
So maybe the biggest danger, especially for guys, is ego.
Yeah.
It's anybody who's actually serious in the gym doesn't actually care how much you're lifting. And so just start with less than you think you can do.
I don't know. Or if they do, it's because they do in the sense that they want to see you getting better at it. So they care about your progression, not exactly where you're at now.
Yeah. It's number of times I've seen, especially like some of the younger, like high school guys and stuff that I've worked with, or I've seen them go to the gym, and they're like, I can, I can, I can do more. And you're like,
Hmm.
you don't need, like, there's no benefit to you injuring yourself right now to try to improve a point.
Yeah, and from just like the strength coach in me, one of the sayings that like sticks by me is like you build strength in like 3 to 5, you test strength in like 3 to 1. So like if all you're doing is going in and trying to max out all the time, you're not building as much strength as you are just testing where you're at. If you think about it, you don't get better at school by going in and taking a test every week. You have to get lessons.
Mm.
So it's the same way in the gym is you have to kind of build base and build your strength, and then the test will come
Mm.
when you want to, but know what you're doing before you test there.
Mm.
Have spotters, have that support, and those people watching you and coaching you, and making sure even when you are doing heavy lifting to do it in a safe way, as safe as possible. There's always a risk when you're going to lift heavy. The best lifters in the world will get injuries because they're specifically trying to lift as heavy as possible. But in the same way that like we're viewing physical fitness in your extension of godliness and your extension of the responsibilities and stuff that you do have as as a man of faith, as a father, those kind of things, as a husband, you're not very useful when you're injured either.
Mm. Hmm.
At least not in the same way.
Or so sore you can't move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I've done that to myself before. Switching gears a little bit to something that's adjacent to this. You are probably one of the most experienced people that I know when it comes to practicing fasting. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about fasting from the two different ways that you can look at fasting, which is fasting from a health perspective and then
Mhm.
fasting from a faith perspective. Um, one, what's the difference? What would you say the difference is?
The difference is the goal,
Mm.
because physically your body's going through the same things, whether you're fasting for health or fasting for spiritual focus. But the difference is like when you're fasting for spiritual focus, it's like a way to kind of remove distractions, one, but two, also like it kind of deprives yourself of certain worldly things and helps you focus on spiritual things. But yeah, there was a time whenever I'd make a big decision, I'd go in and fast. I will admit I haven't been as good about that lately.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's because this the same decisions I haven't had you know to make. Next time I have like a big one, I will try to take that in consideration. Coming out of a fast, the same type of things apply, whether it was health or spiritual, because you're ending the fast. Obviously, you don't end a fast by going to a buffet and eating as much as you can. That could be a problem for a few reasons. One, like when you fast, your stomach is kind of shrank, so you're not going to be able to eat big meals right away. And two, like if you're, the way your body kind of adapts to that low blood sugar and stuff like that too, like big spikes after it can be pretty dangerous, especially for some people. But there's also been evidence to show that people that have really adept at fasting can handle those spikes pretty well too.
Mhm.
But you can get like bad issues from immediately going and eating very large meals after a fast.
Mm.
But most of the time, you're going to be pretty good at, and I'm talking about longer term fasting. Your normal like intermittent fasting, you can probably get a pretty good meal every day, especially if you're doing like a 1 meal a day diet. If you're somebody who expends 3,000 calories a day and you're eating 1 meal a day, it's going to be a big meal.
Yeah. Um, so from a like if someone's interested in the idea of trying to do like longer term fasting, what are some of and say their focus is doing it for a health reason,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are some of the considerations that you think it's important for people to take in, and like some of the ways to like check and maintain that you're still getting necessary like nutrients, stuff like that your body may need. Say you're going to do like, I'm going to do I don't know, I want to try fasting for 3 days, or I want to try fasting for a week or something like that.
For most people, you don't need to worry too much about nutrients in that amount of time because you usually store enough of at least like the really essential things. I know there's water soluble vitamins and fat soluble vitamins where, the water soluble ones, you may not have a whole lot, in that time, but it's usually pretty safe for people to do at least that short of a fast with that. But the biggest consideration is just what health conditions do you have currently? And if there's anything that is a concern, usually it's mainly things like liver and kidney to really like check with your doctor first. Or if you have had like specific swelling or edema issues, because the biggest thing with like fasting and even like really low carb diets do is they affect your insulin a lot, and insulin affects kind of your sodium storage and your water balance a whole lot. So if you have it, like any of those organs with that impacts the most, you should make sure you don't have underlying health conditions. So I would say if you're ever doing anything that to your own experience would be considered extreme, you should probably ask your personal doctor or
Mm.
somebody that that has been alongside you in that realm long enough to kind of do it in a way that's not going to be dangerous.
Yeah. Yes, that is the disclaimer on this. None of this is health advice. Talk to your own personal doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Or, um, yeah, because I do remember when you were doing some of your longer ones, and even with the one that I did, you also like you had that like fast juice that you were making.
Yes.
It was like where
Yeah.
you'd add essential salts and was it baking soda that was the or something like that also that you were putting in it.
I mean that was one of them, but it was because you want to get certain amounts of sodium, potassium,
Mm.
magnesium, and I can't, name the exact amounts over your head. I always go and check before I make something like that. But basically, if you're fasting, you do deplete a lot of just minerals and stuff. So if you're doing it for longer amounts, it's not for like a reason where you also are specifically depriving yourself of those things for like a spiritual reason. Yeah, you can easily like get through it better making sure you have those minerals and stuff like that too.
Mhm.
Especially like lightheadedness and stuff like that comes from fasting. Part of it is like the low calorie, but part of it's just like, you are going to have less minerals and salts and stuff in your body that, will affect you. So if you're doing longer term stuff, it is good to have some sort of at least electrolyte
Mhm.
beverages. Um, However, the longer you're going, the more important something like that would be.
Mm. Keeping in mind stuff too of like be realistic about if you're addicted to caffeine, like
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna make it that's gonna be harder than the fast.
Yeah, and try to do better than the last time. So
Yeah.
don't feel like you have to, you're not going to hit a home run the first time you play baseball. So why do you expect that the first time you try fasting, you're going to do like a 30-day fast?
Yeah. I was like, well, or I mean,
Yeah.
it's similar to kind of the thing with the gym, right? Of like, don't go in and try to max out immediately. Of
Yeah.
just, it's an incremental thing. Um, on the faith side of fasting, what? So, if you had a decision, right, a big decision that you were going to make is, I'm going to change jobs or something like that. What would that actually look like for you? Because I think we hear about the idea, right, that fasting is an important spiritual discipline.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the reasons a lot of people don't do it is because there's not a great instruction guide. Yeah, like there's not specifically where it's like you're allowed to have this much of or you need to wait this time, and part of that's because it's a personal journey.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's the fact that there's not like that there's not like great examples is part of the reason why people are hesitant about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like what, like for you, what is, and I know that's not going to be like, you're not giving like a guideline for people, but just like from your personal experience, what do those look like for you?
I mean, for me, usually I do it until I have clarity or until hunger comes back.
Okay.
But the first thing is early. You there will be hunger. There will be hunger early. So like that's not what I mean by when hunger comes back. I mean when you do fasting, there will be a time where you have a lot of hunger, and then eventually there's also a time when you kind of get over that hunger,
Mhm.
and then eventually that kind of hunger comes back. At least that's how it's always been for me. Or I'll get clarity on like what I was doing, or like come to some sort of conclusion that's like clear, or like whether that's something comes up, or it's just like, hey, I've been doing this, has been focusing on it, it makes sense. But I think biblically the biggest thing you see, at least with fasting, is it's almost always paired with prayer.
Mm.
Like it's fasting and prayer, fasting and prayer. It's not just like, oh, we're gonna fast. It's
I'm just
like
going to refuse to eat till
fasting and
God tells me
prayer.
what I
Yeah,
want.
yeah. Now there are times when like God has called people just to fast, but that's not the personal fasting. That's like, you know, when Israel's army was told to fast, and then Jonathan, I think it was Jonathan that told them to go ahead and eat, and that's like the only time I've seen like a negative effect of fasting in the Bible.
Mhm.
That's because they were declared to fast, and then he had them break it just because he didn't think they should be fasting. So that was an interesting thing, and is that most of the time, like I used to not be like, oh, fasting and prayer is not necessarily something like magical or miraculous. But then biblically, when you go and read about fasting, it becomes pretty clear that one, it's kind of expected,
Mhm.
and two, there's not really examples in the Bible where it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's something is kind of hard to look at as a logical, just rational person and be like, nothing should be like, oh, a guarantee to work. But I can't look biblically and say that fasting doesn't work,
Mm.
because almost everywhere in the Bible where you fast, it works.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of, yeah, you can point to a ton of examples in the Bible where it mentions people fasting and praying.
Mm-hmm.
Almost, I can't think of, yeah, I can't off the top of my head think of one where it doesn't produce the results that God intends. And I think something that I think is interesting, like something that I think needs to be addressed with it too, is I do think people need to be in prayer about whether or not they're being called to fast first,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a little bit of a thing of just going, well, I'm just gonna, I want a decision, and it needs to be with the right intention, in the sense of, like, I'm not going to go into prayer and fasting because I want to change God's mind.
Yeah.
I'm going into
Or I'm
prayer
going
and
to
fasting.
reluctantly fast until like it is changed.
Yeah.
It's like that's not the mindset
I,
that you're
I'm
going to do
gonna
here.
I'm gonna pray and fast because I'm searching for God's will,
Mm-hmm.
and those are not the same thing. And one of the biggest things I think you see that does, I know Jesus talks about it specifically with the Pharisees, and it gets mentioned multiple times through there, is it's done in private. That's like, if you're fasting just for your health, I think it's perfectly fine to just like tell your friends ahead of time, hey, please don't invite me to go eat because
Mm-hmm.
I'm fasting right now. If it is a private thing, if you're searching for something from God, and now where it's not private is like, obviously you need to, like, in that same time frame, especially if you're trying to like come to a conclusion,
Mm-hmm.
you should also be seeking counsel from people and stuff. But like, you don't need to include in that counsel, like, hey, by the way, I'm also fasting about this, so it'd be great
Mm-hmm.
if you gave me advice really fast.
Yep. It'd be like, hey, can we meet to talk about this decision, but we're not going to go to lunch because I'm fasting.
Yeah. It's,
Um,
yeah. That is a thing that I think is hard about it also, is just like this, oh, I'm gonna, and I think the problem is it gets viewed as a, I don't know the word I'm looking for, almost like I'm gonna suffer, or like
mm-hmm.
it gets viewed as this thing of, oh, I have to punish myself in some way, as opposed to, no, this is an opportunity, like, I'm gonna intentionally deny this thing to get myself closer to God's will in this way. And it's an act of faith to say, I'm going to lean on God for
Mm-hmm.
sustainment in this moment.
Yeah, you can view it like people view it as giving up something, but it's actually making room for something better. Does that make
Mm.
sense? Like you're making more room for God
Yeah.
in a way. Like not that he can't take however much room he wants or needs, but you're going without other things to make more room for God.
I think maybe a pretty good rule of thumb is, like, if you're immediately feeling resentful about it, maybe you're not being called to fast
Yeah.
right now.
Yep.
Or you're really being called. Well,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
much bigger problem that
Yeah,
needs to
there's
be
something else
addressed.
telling you not to.
Mm.
I also think it's probably one of the most lost disciplines.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's, yeah, there's that's probably something I think, in especially in the West, that is done maybe the least. And I don't know, maybe that's part of the problem.
I feel like I hear more sermons where a preacher will mention that you can tell that they haven't fasted or make a joke about
Mhm.
something like that than you do actually them talking about the importance of fasting.
Yeah.
But I think part of that may be because of how culturally ingrained it was, in the culture back then. Like what you said, like, well, there aren't a whole lot of like specific guidelines on fasting. maybe because it was just so culturally relevant stuff they didn't think there was, and now we live in a culture where it's not relevant, and now we're like we don't know how to do it.
Yeah, like we wouldn't if we like if we were writing something that was going to be recorded for people in the future and it was talking about, well, like I have a prayer on my drive to work every day, and 1,000 years from now people don't drive cars.
Yeah, so like, what do I
It's like
pray?
what? Okay, what does it look like to pray while you drive? Like, well, I don't like in my brain I'm not going to be able to articulate that because like, oh, that's just a thing we do.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, that makes sense. That's an interesting way to look at it. Just kind of some other questions, maybe kind of not really related to any of this stuff. One, any thought? So you have it? Was it June? Was your and Cassie's 1 year anniversary?
yes,
So,
June 1st.
so first year of marriage. Any thoughts from because you for people who are now you are 35.
What year is it? Yes, I'm 35.
35. So you were a little bit older whenever you got married. Um, any advice in regards to um, like one waiting on marriage, kind of making those decisions is like and making the decision to go, okay, now it's time, or like any like disciplines that you're like, if I had been practicing this when I was younger, it might have been easier whenever I got like it might have been better, or like I'm glad that this is a thing that that like God put into my life beforehand.
I feel like marriage will like amplify the good, some of the good and the bad.
Mm.
So a lot of times, like, yeah, there's always a thing that's better to, you want to work on, or you have more opportunities to work on before you have somebody else in your life, whether it's, not even marriage, even just like dating and stuff like that. But I also think that God works in his time
Mm.
and, an opportunity for it. So there's not like tons of things that I can like look at and be like, oh, if I'd done this, maybe I, could have gotten married earlier or something like that too. I think, everybody kind of has their journey of things they need to be mature on and stuff like that too. Um, I mean, we're talking about the health and fitness we talked about a little bit earlier. Like, it's better to be in shape before you get married, because if habits aren't ingrained when you have the freedom to do things, on your own in your own time, all of a sudden adding other responsibility into your life isn't going to make it easier to do for the most part. Now, I will say that on the motivation side of things, there are obviously you get married, you have other people in your life, you have kids. Like, I've definitely seen a lot of people turn around or make big, large changes in their life because of those things. So I'm not going to say it's not necessarily make it easier, but like from a time perspective, it definitely will make it more difficult. But your motivation could skyrocket, Um,
Hmm.
especially when you said, guys don't like to take care of themselves as much necessarily as they like to take care of other people a lot of times, as far as like, being a father and being a husband. But when they see the need for certain things, like a lot of times, like that's an opportunity for them to step up.
Mm.
And it's, nice when you see that happen in some guy's life, but a lot of times you see it not happen. You're like, man, it would be nice if they would have, gotten some more stuff figured out before they made these big life decisions.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to look at it, I guess. Uh, any like personal lessons or anything that you're like any discoveries from the first year of marriage that you find worth sharing? It's like
Is there
I'm
any
just
like,
I just mean for being like because you've had an experience which is similar to mine of like you I think it's a very different process to be like for like a guy who meets like say, oh, I meet my wife while I'm in college
yeah,
and then I'm immediately married, as opposed to like, 10 years of living on your own to suddenly like
okay,
suddenly getting married.
okay, yeah, I could talk on that topic a little bit. I think one of the big benefits of people getting married really young is that they get to grow, and they get to grow certain walks together and kind of form each other,
Mm.
because you do change as you get older. The benefit of getting married a little bit older is you know what you're getting into. If that makes sense, because you're less likely to keep growing in directions that are opposite of each other,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be a strain when people get married really young.
Mm.
Getting old, like, you don't tend to make huge foundational changes in who you would consider like your identity and stuff
Mm-hmm.
when you're already 30.
Mm.
So in that sense, like, you can be pretty sure rock solid, like on like the big topics that
Mhm.
they're there. As far as, no, not necessarily the age difference, but now that it comes to mind that you asked earlier about big things that changing as far as health and fitness goes, is now all of a sudden your meal planning, your diet choice and stuff like that has to involve another person.
Mm. Hmm.
And that's something that can be difficult too, because if one of you is wanting to take your health seriously, but the other one's not, it's going to be really hard for that not to bleed over.
Mm.
Um, and also like choosing a diet that not only you like, but the foods that you're making your spouse likes,
Mm.
and kind of finding a nice balance there too. Because I know I loved doing low carb diets because I was really good at setting strict guidelines, but I wasn't really good at controlling how much I ate. Whereas those controlled my hunger and
Mm.
helped me to kind of like be strict like that. But my wife likes more variety, so we have to. So kind of working around there, like I would be perfectly fine eating tacos every single day of my life.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but living with somebody else, there's probably a 99.9% chance that they're not going to be okay eating the same food every single day for every single meal.
Yeah. 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 The meal at Roger and Cassie's wedding reception was tacos, and
Yeah.
it was one of my favorite after like
Yeah.
reception meals. Um. So so next week we're gonna have Cassie on.
Mm-hmm.
And you got anything that you want to say for people beforehand about your wonderful wife?
I mean, she is wonderful.
Mhm.
We knew each other quite a bit before we got married or even started dating,
Mhm.
which got rid of what I would consider the hard part of dating, or the
Mhm.
maybe not hard is the word, but maybe the arduous part. All right, I got to figure out, have all these weird conversations of stuff that isn't really necessarily like deep conversation, but you got to like know about, or like find certain stuff out. Whereas a lot of that stuff we already had figured out,
Mm.
like knew about each other, and it was really more just like growing together
Mm.
versus the dating little quiz,
Yeah.
figuring out all the little stuff.
How many siblings do you have? What's
Yeah.
where did you
Yeah.
grow up? That sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Like, do you go to church? Where do you go to church? That kind of
Mm.
stuff. Or, yeah. Do you believe in ghosts?
Yeah. Yeah. Depends on what you define a ghost as.
Yeah.
All right. Well, last question that I try to ask everybody here is favorite Bible verse and why?
I mean, I have different ones that have been my favorite at different times in my life, but I think Ephesians 2:10 is a good one.
Mm.
That you are God's masterpiece, made
Mhm.
in His image to do good works that He's put before you. Um, One, I think it's also very relevant to health and fitness, because although we've talked about like being able and whatever you do, like we're all blessed at different levels with different things, and like not everybody is blessed to be super healthy or physically active or something like that for various reasons. So even in that sense, don't feel like, hey, I'm not as useful as a person because I don't have that. But because no matter what, like you have an identity that a God has given you, and that there are things that are put out for you to do, and a lot of times they're unique to you. So like wherever you're at, wherever your blessings are physically, you know, you are unique to that.
Mm. I like that. Yes, that's been a recurring theme because
Mm-hmm.
I put Ephesians 2:10 as mine. So, all right. Well, Roger, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
This has been the second episode of the Everyday Disciple podcast. Thanks again to Roger. Roger, where if people say somebody wanted to get a hold of you for personal training or anything, what's the best way to do that?
Probably through my Facebook page.
Okay.
Which is Roger James Strength and Performance.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. There we go. So if
I don't
you are
update it much, but I do check it whenever I get messages.
okay, so thanks again. Appreciate you coming, and we will see everybody next week. Bye, everybody.